My wife of 7 years thought she was a genius. She and her lover, my own business partner, spent a year slowly draining my bank accounts, planning to divorce me, take my house, and leave me with millions in corporate debt. They thought I was just a blind, loving husband working 80 hours a week. What they didn't know was that I had discovered their plot on day one. I didn't get mad. I didn't confront them. Instead, I spent the next 14 months orchestrating a fake financial collapse. I tricked her into begging for a postnuptial agreement and then I destroyed both of their lives in front of her entire family on Christmas Eve. My name is Arthur, and this is the story of the most calculated, ruthless, and satisfying revenge you will ever hear. Grab a drink because this is going to be a long ride. It all started on a rainy Tuesday in October. I was 34 years old, the founder of a mid-sized tech logistics company. I was married to Evelyn, a woman who looked like an angel but had the soul of a parasite. We had been married for 7 years. We lived in a $2 million house in the suburbs, drove luxury cars, and from the outside, we were the picture of success. My business partner was a guy named Greg. Greg was my best friend from college. He owned 30% of our company, while I owned 70%. We had built the business from our dorm room to a company generating $15 million in annual revenue. I trusted Greg with my life, and I trusted Evelyn with my soul. I was working late at the office as usual. It was around 9 p.m. I wanted to ask Evelyn if she had fed our golden retriever, Max. Instead of calling her cell phone, I used the drop-in feature on our Amazon Echo Dot device in the living room. For those who don't know, this feature connects immediately like an intercom, without the other person needing to answer. I connected. "Hey Evie, did you feed Max?" I said. There was no answer. But the microphone was picking up crystal clear audio from the living room. I heard the sound of wine glasses clinking. Then, I heard a voice. It wasn't the TV. It was Greg. "We need to be careful with the Cayman accounts," Greg was saying, his voice hushed. "Arthur is oblivious, but his new accountant is sharp. I'm funneling 5% of the quarterly profits into the shell company. By next summer, the business will look like it's bleeding cash." My blood turned to ice. I stopped breathing. I sat in my dark office, my finger hovering over the mute button on my phone, listening as my entire reality shattered. "I can't wait that long, Greg," Evelyn's voice replied. It was the same sweet voice that told me she loved me every morning, now dripping with cold calculation. "I am so sick of playing the supportive wife. Once the company looks bankrupt, he'll be desperate. I'll push for a divorce, take the house and the clean assets in the settlement, and leave him with the corporate debt. Then we can finally be together in Miami." "Just be patient, baby," Greg said. Then, I heard the undeniable sound of them kissing. In my living room. On the couch I paid for. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The betrayal was so massive, so absolute, that it bypassed sadness entirely, and went straight to pure, sociopathic rage. They weren't just cheating. They were conspiring to ruin me, leave me homeless, and steal my life's work. I quietly disconnected the call. I sat in the dark for 3 hours. When I drove home that night, Greg's car was gone. Evelyn was asleep in our bed, wearing my favorite t-shirt. I lay next to her, listening to her breathe, and I made a promise to myself. I wasn't just going to divorce her. I was going to financially and socially obliterate them both. The next morning, I made breakfast, kissed Evelyn on the forehead, and drove to work. I smiled at Greg in the hallway. "Morning, brother," I said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Big day today." "You know it, man." "Let's get this bread," Greg smiled back. His teeth were white, his suit was expensive. He looked perfectly relaxed. I went into my office, locked the door, and made a phone call. I didn't call a divorce lawyer. I called Marcus Vance, an ex-federal prosecutor who now ran the most ruthless private financial investigation firm in the state. I met Marcus at a diner 3 towns over. I told him everything. I played him the audio recording I had managed to pull from the Amazon cloud history. Marcus didn't show any emotion. He just took notes. "If you confront them now," Marcus said, sipping black coffee, "Greg will claim the money was a business investment, and Evelyn will just walk away with half your assets in a standard divorce. You have $8 million in liquid cash, Arthur. We need to make it disappear. Legally." Over the next 3 months, Marcus and I built a fortress. We discovered exactly how Greg was stealing. He had set up a fake vendor company in Delaware called Apex Solutions, and was billing our own company for consulting fees. But instead of stopping him, I let him do it. In fact, I helped him. I started pretending that I was incredibly stressed. I would come home looking exhausted. I started drinking whiskey at dinner. I told Evelyn that the market was shifting, that our supply chain was collapsing, and that the business was taking heavy hits. I don't know what we're going to do, Evie, I said one night, burying my face in my hands. We might have to take out a massive loan against the house. Evelyn's eyes flashed with panic, but she quickly masked it with a sympathetic smile. Oh, honey. Don't say that. Maybe you should just trust Greg to handle the finances more. You're working too hard. It took everything in my power not to laugh in her face. Meanwhile, Marcus was working magic. I quietly sold my 70% stake in the company to an anonymous private equity firm based in Switzerland. The catch. The private equity firm was completely owned by a trust in my mother's maiden name, managed by Marcus. On paper, I no longer owned the company. I was just an employee, with a massive pile of hidden cash sitting legally in a blind trust. By month 6, it was time to turn up the heat. I needed to make Evelyn believe the ship was sinking fast. I started coming home, drunk. It was usually just iced tea in a whiskey glass. I bought cheap clothes. I stopped getting haircuts. I started arguing with debt collectors on the phone loud enough for her to hear. One evening, I sat her down at the kitchen table. I had printed out fake financial statements Marcus had generated for me. They showed the company was $4 million in debt, and that I was personally liable. Evelyn, I said, forcing a tear to roll down my cheek. We are in big trouble. The bank is going to call in the loans. They might seize the house. They might seize your car. She looked at the papers and I could see the absolute disgust in her eyes. The wealthy, successful husband she wanted to steal from was suddenly a liability. Arthur, how could you let this happen? She whispered, playing the victim perfectly. I'm sorry, I sobbed. I'm trying to protect you. I talked to a lawyer today. He suggested we sign a post-nuptial agreement. Her ears perked up instantly. A post-nup? What does that mean? It means, I said, sliding a thick legal document across the table, that we legally separate our assets right now, while we are still married. If we sign this, the house, your car, and your personal bank accounts become 100% yours. The company, the business accounts, and all the corporate debt become 100% mine. That way, when the bank comes after me, they can't touch you. Evelyn stared at the document. I could practically see the gears turning in her head. She thought she had won the lottery. She was getting exactly what she and Greg had planned. She gets the clean assets, and I get the crushing debt. Are you sure, Arthur? She asked, trying to sound hesitant. I feel so bad leaving you with the burden. It's my fault, I lied smoothly. I have to protect you. She signed the post-nuptial agreement so fast she almost ripped the paper. It was notarized the next morning. What Evelyn didn't read in the fine print was a clause my lawyer had brilliantly hidden: all future discoveries of fraud, hidden assets, or criminal financial manipulation by either party immediately nullifies the asset protection of the offending party. She thought she was safe. She had just signed her own death warrant. With the post-nup signed, Evelyn's behavior changed drastically. She stopped pretending to care. She started staying out late, claiming she was supporting a friend. I knew she was at Greg's downtown apartment. But the real icing on the cake was her family. Evelyn's parents, Richard and Susan, had always been snobs. They loved my money. When Evelyn told them secretly she thought that I was going bankrupt, their attitude towards me turned freezing cold. They came over for Thanksgiving dinner. Richard spent the entire evening making passive-aggressive comments. So, Arthur, Richard sneered, carving the turkey. I hear the tech industry is eating you alive. Maybe you should have stuck to something simpler. Like flipping burgers. Greg was also at the table, because of course, he was my best friend and business partner. Greg chuckled and patted my back. Don't be too hard on him, Richard. Artie is trying his best. I'm doing everything I can to keep the company afloat. I looked at Greg. I looked at Evelyn, who was gazing lovingly at him across the table. I looked at her arrogant parents. You know what, Richard, I said quietly, putting down my fork. You're right. I failed. In fact, things are so bad, I'm putting the house on the market next week. Evelyn will keep the profits, thanks to our post-nup, but I'll have to move into a cheap apartment. The table went silent. Evelyn kicked Greg under the table. Well, Susan, my mother-in-law, sniffed. At least Evelyn had the sense to protect herself from your incompetence. I smiled. A genuine, terrifying smile. Yes. She did. The week before Christmas, the trap was fully set. Marcus had handed all the evidence of Greg's embezzlement to the FBI and the IRS. Because Greg had used interstate wire transfers to move stolen money into offshore accounts, it wasn't just corporate theft anymore. It was federal wire fraud and tax evasion. As for Evelyn, remember that post-nup she signed? Because she was secretly communicating with Greg about the stolen funds, she was legally an accessory to the fraud. The clause in our post-nup was triggered. Not only did she lose the protection of the house, but she was now personally liable for half of the stolen money we were suing Greg for. It was December 24th, Christmas Eve. Evelyn's family always hosted a massive, pretentious Christmas Eve party at their country club. Over 200 people were there, doctors, lawyers, local politicians. Evelyn was wearing a stunning red dress, holding a glass of champagne, standing next to Greg. They weren't even hiding it anymore. They stood inches apart, whispering and laughing. I arrived at 8 p.m. I wasn't wearing my depressed, bankrupt clothes. I was wearing a bespoke Tom Ford suit. I walked into the ballroom looking like a billionaire. Evelyn saw me and frowned. She walked over, looking annoyed. Arthur, what are you doing here? And what are you wearing? We can't afford that suit. Actually, Evelyn, I said loudly, drawing the attention of the people around us. I can afford a lot of things. Greg walked over, playing the peacemaker. Hey man, calm down. Have a drink. Let's not make a scene at her parents' party. Greg, I smiled. I didn't come for a drink. I came to deliver your Christmas presents. I snapped my fingers. The double doors of the ballroom opened. 3 men in dark suits walked in. 2 of them were federal agents. The third was a process server. The music stopped. 200 high society guests turned to look at the commotion. Evelyn's parents, Richard and Susan, rushed over, their faces pale. Arthur, what is the meaning of this? Richard demanded. I ignored him. I looked at Greg. The federal agents walked straight up to Greg. Gregory Thomas. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Greg's champagne glass dropped, shattering on the marble floor. His arrogant smile vanished instantly. Wait. This is a mistake. Arthur, tell them. Tell them what, Greg? I asked, my voice echoing in the dead silent room. Tell them about Apex Solutions. Tell them about the $3.2 million you funneled to the Cayman Islands. Or should I tell them about how you've been sleeping with my wife on my couch for the last 14 months? A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. Evelyn let out a high-pitched scream. Arthur, stop, she cried, grabbing my arm. You're crazy. It's not true. I gently removed her hand from my arm. The process server stepped forward and handed Evelyn a thick stack of legal documents. Evelyn, I said, looking her dead in the eyes. Merry Christmas. You've just been served with divorce papers. And a civil lawsuit for conspiracy to commit corporate fraud. Oh, and about that post-nup you signed so happily. It's voided. My lawyers have already frozen your bank accounts, and the house is being seized tomorrow. Evelyn's legs literally gave out. She collapsed onto her knees right there in her expensive red dress, sobbing uncontrollably. Her father, Richard, was hyperventilating. You're bankrupt. You have nothing. You can't do this. I buttoned my suit jacket. Richard, I was never bankrupt. I sold my company to a private trust that I control for $22 million cash. I've been a multimillionaire this entire year. I just wanted to see how far your daughter's greed would go. I walked out of that country club to the sound of Greg being handcuffed and read his Miranda rights, while Evelyn screamed my name from the floor. It was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. The aftermath was absolute devastation. Greg was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. He lost everything. Because he couldn't pay the IRS penalties, they seized his cars, his apartment, and his retirement accounts. Evelyn didn't go to prison, but her life was entirely ruined. Because of her complicity in the fraud, the judge awarded me 100% of the marital assets. She was left with absolutely zero. Her parents had to remortgage their own house just to pay for her defense lawyers. They went from being high society snobs to drowning in debt. Evelyn now works as a receptionist at a low-end dental clinic. She has to take the bus because she can't afford a car. She tried to call me once, begging for a second chance, crying about how much she missed the life we had. I didn't say a word. I just held my phone up to the Amazon Echo Dot in my new penthouse, played the recording of her and Greg kissing on my couch and hung up. Sometimes, revenge isn't about throwing a quick punch. Sometimes, it's about playing the long game. It's about letting the rats build their nest in a cage, and waiting 14 months to lock the door and set the whole thing on fire.